Otherwise, if we want to go through and maybe do some quick introductions with everyone that's here, we can just quickly do name and either a company or where we work, just so we kind of have a sense of who everyone is. Also, if you guys don't have it in gallery view right now, you should, because then you can kind of see everyone. It feels like we're all in person. It's super nice. So I'll get started with the introductions. And we're gonna skip all the panelists and D for now, because you'll get to hear from them later. But my name is Rachel, and I'm the marketing and events coordinator for Startup Zone. And I know most of you already. Wendy.
Find my end. Wendy McIntyre, human resources consultant. Have been doing some work with the Startup Zone since its inception. No, since it started, not inception. Happy to be along. So many people. Thank you, Glenn.
You are a rock star.
You know I think that of you.
Love you.
How does anybody follow that?
All right, Angela.
Good luck, suckers. Good luck.
Thanks, Wendy. I'm Angela McDonald. I also do some work for the Startup Zone. I am a contract CFO.
Nice. Carrie?
Oh, cool.
Hi, Carrie Jones. I don't know why my name is not right. Balance Consulting. I do employee wellness, primarily ergonomics.
Awesome. Erin?
Hello, I'm Erin Robar. I know most of you here. I'm the operations manager at the Startup Zone. So any questions about the Startup Zone, come on over.
Yay.
Awesome. Pat?
Hey everyone, yeah, Patrick here, CEO of the Startup Zone. Super excited for this. Get it going.
Awesome. Gregor?
Hi, I'm Gregor McEwen. I'm founder of Modelmar. We provide various services to the aquaculture industry.
Sweet. Sparrow?
Hi, I'm Sparrow McGowan. I have resident company ShopSpotter at Startup Zone, and we're a early stage tech.
Awesome. Clark?
Hi, I'm Clark. I work in experience design and sometimes do some work for the Startup Zone as a product specialist.
Awesome. Brian? No. Amy? Last try. Mike?
Okay, I'm trying to.
Oh. Sorry, everyone. The introductions are really awkward. Amy?
Okay, yeah, now I'm here because I'm just joining. Amy from PI Connectors, Charlottetown Chamber of Commerce.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Amy. And then Mike?
Hi, Mike Taylor, new to this community, work with RBC in their wellness division, financial wellness and broader wellness packages for companies under 30.
Cool, awesome. Well, I think that's everyone here that has their cameras on. Oh, Brian can unmute himself. Maybe I can unmute you? Yeah, there you go, Brian. We can hear you now.
Hi, I'm Brian Sharp from Onset Communication. Thanks.
Thanks for coming out, Brian. All right, sweet. So I think I'll let Dee take it away now. She has a really exciting panel planned for today. We have lots of great questions for our new specialists. And yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, all the panelists today are new in-house specialists at Startup Zone, same with Dee. So if you are a member of the Startup Zone, this is a good chance to get to meet them too and see what resources are available to you guys now. But yeah, Dee, I'll let you take it away. I'm really excited for this and just kind of talking about planning for post-pandemic rather than everything we've been doing recently, which is kind of more in the crisis management mode. And yeah, also I might mute you guys if I hear anything coming from the mic. Sorry about that. Otherwise, I think we're all good to go. Dee?
Hey everybody, I'm Dee. Rachel mentioned I am an in-house specialist. I have a company called Jump Strategies. We work on brand and marketing development. Sorry, I've got a dog who thinks I should pay attention to her. And we do business development strategies. So kind of a strategist for hire. The way it's going to work is I'll intro our panel. I'm then going to take them through a quick fire where they get 2 minutes each to tell us their top 3 pieces of advice for you. So if you've got a pen, that would be the time to take your notes because They're going to give you their gems of wisdom. Once that's over, I'll then be asking each of the panelists a question. Well, they'll get a chance to expand a little bit on some of their thoughts about what you need to do to be planning. The other panel members will be able to jump in and discuss. After that's over, we're going to go to a Q&A where you can all jump in and ask your questions based either on what we've discussed or if you have something else you'd like to pick their brain about. Super great timing for Talk About Post-Pandemic, as most of the provinces and territories are starting their how to reopen plans, and it's giving us at least a little bit of certainty of what we need to be thinking moving forward. So Larry, if you can wave. Larry is a brand coach. I've known Larry for a long time. And he works with founders to help them understand their brand and how to maximize the potential. He's worked with lots of great clients nationally and internationally. Wealth of knowledge, great guy. Lisa is the founder and president of Pivotal Coaching, high business acumen leader, credentialed sales professional, and certified executive coach. So Lisa leads teams and clients in large corporations and has hands-on experience executing change and growth mandates. So all things sales, executive, that's Lisa's world. Glenn, I met recently and have already sent one of my clients to have a preliminary chat with him. He's a principal and chief people strategist at Nishimura Consulting. He's based out of Toronto, helps startups and scale-ups across North America and Europe to build and optimize their teams. He's been a columnist on a number of HR and performance management guides and Canadian business. So that's Glenn, lots of knowledge, great guy. And finally, we have Matt, who is the director of product at a startup in Halifax called QRA. And he's been building and marketing products for over 20 years, co-founded Swept, where he led the product team from $0 to $1 million annual recurring revenue. He works with lots of early stage startups to help them understand their customers and make evidence-informed product decisions. So that's your panel of experts today. The quick fire. So Lisa, I'm going to go with you last just to give you time to get your Zoom, which I believe Rachel is going to get out there to people to give you an opportunity to get some feedback. And Rachel, if you can coordinate with Lisa directly on that. So I'm going to start with Matt. Matt, I gave you 2 minutes to tell me the top 3 things. This is your elevator pitch. You're in the elevator with these entrepreneurs and startups, and you got 3 floors to tell them 3 things that they need to remember when they walk out that door to plan post-pandemic. Go. You're muted, my dear.
Thanks. I think the first one is that the trade-off of all of the downswing of people being laid off and all the companies that have been hit so hard has also created an influx of a ton of talent. So I think that it's also proven that we can work remotely, or a lot of companies are set up well for working remotely. And I think the first thing is that you can think about talent from anywhere. So the key thing for me, I think, is to find missionaries as opposed to mercenaries to work with. You have people that you can work with now from any corner of the globe. So work with people that you really want, that believe what you're working on. I think the second one is to underline the importance of having a viable business. So think about, instead of an MVP, think about an MVB, which is a minimum viable business. So this sort of thing underlines the importance of thinking that the only way to build a business is to get VC and scale up really, really quick. And there's, that part of the industry is really hurting right now. So I think the best chance you have at whether or not you go VC or bootstrap is going to be proving that you have a way of delivering real value with paying customers. So that's really critical. And I think the last one is to think digitally first. It's probably a terrible thing to think of, but it won't be the last time that we're going to have to deal with something like this. So people are now finding out analog processes and procedures are really hindering their ability to deliver their product or their service. So think digitally first and take advantage of leveraging some of the technology available. You're muted, Dee.
Thanks, Matt. That's great. So I'm going to move on to Glenn. So Glenn, you're in the elevator. You got 3 floors. You're going to dispel your wisdom on
Okay. Thank you.
startups
Good morning.
and entrepreneurs. And
Yeah.
when they walk off that elevator on the ground floor,
Yeah.
you've got to be ready to hit the ground running. What are your 3 things?
Got it. Thank you. Nice to see everybody. I wanted to start off by saying, it's often said that a good leader solves problems, but a great one anticipates them. And just to what Matt was saying, this pandemic will not be the last one. This will not be the last crisis, small or large, health or financial, global or local, that companies will face. So I think it's important for businesses to create a business continuity plan, which is, it's going to probably save your ass the next time it happens. So sit down with your leadership team right now, map out some potential scenarios and threats that the business could possibly face. Look at the scope of the impact that those issues may have, and what is going to be your response? Is it going to be proportional to what the issue might be? This might be a global pandemic. It might be a gas leak in your neighborhood. It could be one of your top performers decides to leave. I mean, problems will happen all the time. And the worst time to make a decision is when you're actually in the thick of it. Try and anticipate it wherever possible. So figure out what the mission critical roles are in your company. Who do you absolutely need to have by your side when things get better, or when the shit hits the fan the next time around? Who are the key people that you need to have next to you? Look at all of the roles, all the responsibilities, prioritize them, what's important. Even look at the rest of your team right now as well. Look at who's ready for advancement, who has the potential to do better, who's potentially on the cusp of leaving as well. The better prepared you are for those types of issues in any business, the better off you'll be when they actually happen. The second thing I want to mention is cross-train your employees. This pandemic has underscored just how much emphasis we put on one country or one person, right? We have, 80% of the world's mobile phones built in China. We have 2/3 of the world's shoes built in China. So what happens when the country goes down? The entire economy suffers. This is what happens in startups as well. You have a lot of skill sets or expertise devoted to one person. So what happens when they leave? Then you're screwed. So it's important to put in some sort of cross-training exercise. Not so that somebody is doing 100% or duplicating their job entirely, but some of the core primary responsibilities, what can you do to disperse it to other people so that you're not left hanging? Don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Reduce those dependencies wherever possible. And lastly, and I know my colleague Wendy's been through this as many times as well, I think also to prepare for the next pandemic or the next issue, stop hiring for skills and experience. Studies have shown numerous times that those are the 2 things which people focus on at the beginning, and those 2 things matter very little when it comes to retention or performance. It matters very little at all. When it comes to the next pandemic or the next issue that happens with your business, you have to start looking for more soft skills. Look for people who are highly adaptable. Look for people who have a strong sense of urgency, who think very critically, who solve problems very well. And probably above all, look for people who have a sense of integrity. I'm hearing stories now from some of my clients whose salespeople are down, 80% on their quarter. They're now engaging in activities which would be suspicious or immoral in order to make their numbers. You have to have people who are going to stick to their values, have a sense of morality, and work within the value sets that you have for the organization. You don't want anybody going rogue that way. So make very clear what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior.
Awesome.
That's it. Thank you, Dave.
Business continuity, cross-train, and hire for those soft skill sets.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Larry, you're up next.
All right, very good. Hi, everybody. Great to be here today. I'm going to speak on marketing-related subjects, and the 3 things that I want to share with you relate to, first of all, marketing communications. And I think that consumers are going to emerge from this pandemic, and not that we're completely going to emerge, because there's going to be a continuation for a long time, much more vulnerable than than before. And so just as companies now are showing empathy and caring throughout the pandemic, I think that companies and brands will need to continue to show that level of empathy, and where possible, enable delight with customers. And so I think tone and values are very important as we go forward. I think the second thing relates to your product, your experience, your pricing, things of that nature. But people are going to reevaluate their priorities at this time, and I think that as they emerge, there's going to be a sort of a new set of priorities for people. And I think that marketers that are in tune with that and sort of align with that changing value set and help consumers to realize their dreams, I think that will be something that we need to be thinking about. And the last is really relating to channels and I guess experience as well. And it relates to Matt's point earlier that people and organizations during this pandemic have embraced technology like never before. And so there's an acceleration of the digital transformation that is happening in consumers' lives and in companies. And I think that marketers need to take advantage of that or look at the opportunity and see the opportunity in that, and enable that digital transformation, find easier ways for people to do the things that they value, and help companies to simplify the way that they do work and serve their customers. So I think that those are the three things that I would emphasize. You're on mute, Dee.
People are going to be more vulnerable, and companies need to consider that in their marketing and show that empathy and create delight. They are going to reevaluate their priorities, and the value set may change, and as well that they're embracing digital, and that companies succeeding forward need to deal with that. Three things, right? Awesome. All right, Lisa, we're on to you.
All right, we are just going to go with Lisa's agenda. We were going to do a bit of a poll, but we're going with Lisa's agenda. So,
Lisa's in the elevator and she's ready.
My comments come from a perspective of a B2B sales focus, and it's around the virtual selling. So the 3 points that I'd like to emphasize are around virtual trust, doing your prep, and then the 80-20 rule. And so in the virtual trust piece, what's happened is that we've moved from a 3D environment to 2D. And even as the social distancing eases, anyone who has a business outside of Atlantic Canada, they are going to have to learn how to sell like this. And so building trust, and if you're building new relationships, is going to take a different style. So there are nuances. So if you'll notice that, things like where my face is to the camera, what's behind me, those are all personal brand building moments, the way I'm dressed, how you start the conversation, taking some time for the personal connection, those types of things are all going to matter. The preparation side, that is nothing new and something pre-COVID I would talk about. But again, the preparation takes even more intensity because you've got to be very agile, and it is even more important to be engaging and interactive on these virtual environments. And so how you decide the conversation, the visuals, whiteboarding, all those types of things. And one of the reasons I had hoped to do a poll, because these are learning to use the tools within your video conference are essential to supporting how you connect. And again, align to the style of your client, what they might like. So, your very ideas-oriented buyer, they'll love the whiteboard idea. Your analytics will want the slides with the data and insights. finally, the 80-20 rule, which has always been there, but what I'm finding is that the 80-20 rule is getting breached a lot more. And the 80-20 rule is that the client, the customer, does 80% of the talking and you do 20% of the talking. And interestingly, in the virtual environment, because it feels more awkward, what I'm finding is that salespeople are doing a lot more of the talking. So being very conscious of that balance of how you get your customer engaged. And that's where, you know, the use of really strong, open questions and being okay with the pauses matter even more now.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. I think those were clear. The virtual trust, the prep, and the 80-20 rule is what Lisa has sent you out of the elevator with.
And I'm going to get followed up with an article. So I just put that in the chat. One of a local Atlantic Canadian thought leader published this week. So you'll all enjoy reading that.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. All right. So that's our panel's quickfire session. And now I'm just going to get them talking a little bit more in depth about some ideas that they have for you. And I'm going to start with Glenn. So Glenn, unmute yourself.
Okay.
Lots of startups are going to be running leaner than usual post-pandemic. So what can they do, given that a lot of them were already lean and they're even leaner now? So, and that's not just startups. I think that's true of entrepreneurs and small businesses and other corporations as well. So where do they go from here?
Absolutely. Good. Very good point. I was just reading a survey recently just about a landscape of how much damage this pandemic has been doing. Again, looking at everything through an HR lens here. 75% of the startups globally have trimmed their staff to some degree. And in fact, 60% of those have cut by more than 40%. And I would say probably 20% of my client base has suspended their operations entirely. So this is not just Toronto or Canada, it's global. And 2/3 of startups have less than 6 months cash left in the bank. So that's lean. That's pretty lean. Yeah. So one of the things I would recommend first is, we got to stop any further bleeding. So again, looking at things from an HR perspective, whatever team you have left, the ones that you haven't laid off, the ones that are still with you, they're going to feel very lost and unmotivated at this point. So it's very important to stop any potential bleeding. Those people who might, productivity loss from there, or they might decide to leave, it's important to stop that bleeding. So have a one-on-one conversation with the team that you have left, right? Talk about how they came through the pandemic, talk about any issues that they have, what they would like to see, reward them, incentivize them to get back on track as quickly as possible. Thank them for hanging in. That one-on-one connection will be critical in order to rebuild the team and make sure that everybody is on the same page. And more so than that, you've got to sit down with your accountant or your CFO, really lay out to everybody in a transparent and honest way, here's what happened to our business over this past few months. And here's my plan for going forward. Without that plan, people are still going to wonder, are we going to be here in 6 months or in 3 months? They need to know from you, from the leader of the team, what you're going to be doing to get sales back, to encourage everybody to do a great job. What's the market look like? This is where you really need to step up. So this is where, and Lisa can certainly talk about this too. Many startup founders and CEOs are not necessarily good leaders, and it's a difficult transition for them to make, particularly if they have lots of people. But this is a time where they're going to be looking to their leaders for some guidance and some comfort. So it's important to do that. Secondly, and this is something I'm advising some of my clients now too, is if you are in the financial position to rehire people, don't automatically rehire all the people that you've just laid off. This is an opportunity for you to take stock of everybody. This is an opportunity for you to think strategically, not just bring back those people who are high performers, but think about those people who have high potential. Right? We think in our world about hypos and hypers, high potential people as well as high performance people. Those high potential people are the ones who are going to be looking for an opportunity to step up and shine, particularly post-pandemic. Give those people the opportunity to do so. This is also a great opportunity to start filling that recruitment pipeline all the time. Much like a sales pipeline, a recruitment pipeline needs to be full all the time. And most often than not, startup founders will hire when they're ready to hire. But you've got to start looking before then. So I'm encouraging people, if you don't have a careers page on your website, build one. And most people will go, but I don't have any open jobs. Why would I bother? That's not the point. The point is you have to start talking about your values, your mission, what you want to accomplish in the world, right? And get some people to come into that funnel and start having conversations with them. Even if you're not ready to hire for 3 months, 6 months, a year from now, at least you're tapping into people who might potentially be ready to be hired when you're ready to pull the trigger. So start filling that recruitment pipeline now. For many startups right now, again, on the whole theme of running lean, it's same destination, smaller boat, right? That's the philosophy that they're going to be doing. So you've got to think about your existing team right now. Is this working for me? Do I have the right org structure? Do I have the right people? Do I have the right people in the right roles? What training and reskilling initiatives do I need to put into place? Back to what a couple of the guys were talking about before, we've all been thrown into this remote working situation. Those people who were already working remote or already had a distributed workforce, they were already prepared for it. But for many people, it was a surprise. And for some people, it's working, and for some people, it's not. So think about, again, from an office space expenses perspective, is it worthwhile for me to continue this? How is it going to impact my culture? How is it going to impact communication? There are pros and cons to this sort of format. So that may or may not work. One quick tip around remote working, it's usually better to do either 100% in-house or 100% remote. As soon as you start splitting it up in any way, shape, or form, it gets very, very challenging. Especially if you have 9 people in the office and 1 person working remotely. You've got to work extra hard for that one remote person to make them feel like they're part of the team. So it gets a little bit trickier. This is also a good opportunity to revisit your employment. Do I need to hire employees? If I have a short-term project, can I get by hiring a self-employed contractor, staying within the CRA guidelines to do so? Now is also a good time to look at comp. Is it an opportunity for me to, to look at people's salaries, maybe raise some in some cases, maybe lower some in some cases? Again, being careful not to trigger constructive dismissal stuff. But it's a good time to look at everything around your workforce: people, roles, org structure, compensation, everything, all of those things. And lastly, I'll mention very quickly, it's important now to start building that culture, that foundation for a culture that can adapt and solve problems quickly. Because again, crises will happen at any given time without forewarning. So look at the way that you make decisions in your company. Streamline them as much as possible. Are you encouraging new ideas from people on a regular basis? Are you encouraging respectful debate? Or do people just shut up and say, okay, boss, whatever you say? That's not a good decision-making process. You want people to challenge you in a respectful way and say, that's a great idea, but have we given thought to this? That's what makes a great decision. And unless you have that culture where people feel encouraged to act and people feel respected to voice their opinions, you're going to be, behind the 8 ball again when another tragedy strikes. So think about how you can reward and incentivize people to speak up, to be more respectful in that, and make stronger decisions. And root all of that in honesty and transparency. I think we've seen on both sides of the border what it's like for political leaders to push their own agenda as ahead of their own citizens. Everything has to be rooted in honesty and transparency. You've got to work on that as a leader as well.
Okay, so
thank you.
Matt, let me ask you, I asked Glenn, these startups are going to be running fairly lean, or many of them post-pandemic. What does that mean on the product development side? How can they prepare for that? What do they do next? And you're on mute.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I think the pandemic has made that question ultra relevant. I think it's mainly because the act of being wrong, if you're picking whether or not it's the wrong feature, or when you're starting, it's building that wrong MVP or with a wrong set of features, it has a lot deeper, like further hitting implications now. So in my experience, I think a lack of clarity around what your product or your service should include is typically connected to an unclear understanding of your customer's needs. So I think a method that I found works really well is going through the act of literally writing down your assumptions about 3 different key areas of your customer, and going through this process really helps you kind of weed out these assumptions that, if you're wrong, could have some fairly big implications to your business. So I think the first one is instead of thinking about who your customer is, it's the ideal customer. So the ideal customer is someone that you feel, if you were able to get your product or service in front of them, that 10 out of 10 times, they're going to be able to convert, you're going to be able to convert them into a paying customer, that they have, your product has all the right features and services that they need to solve a really important problem. And that's actually related to the second one. I think that you need to make sure that whatever, if it's a brand new product, that the problem you're trying to solve is urgent, but it's also, you know, underserved at this point. And so what I mean by that is, it's not enough to build a product that solves a problem that they have an existing solution for, that they're somewhat satisfied with. You have to go deeper than that. You have to really understand where their problem is unmet. What solution are they looking for, that, or what problem do they have that's both important and underserved, right? So that's really important as well. And I think the third one is having empirical evidence that there's willingness to pay for your product or your service. So if you're starting, it's all about what that MVP could be, and you really don't have a business until someone's bought your product or service. For someone who has an existing product, it's really about thinking, how do I spend these, you know, fairly hard hit resources on making sure that whatever it is we build next is going to deliver additional value that hopefully you're either going to be willing to charge more for, or at least retain that customer for a longer term. So spending a lot of time thinking about talking to customers or prospects, if you're just starting out on that, about those three topics, exponentially improves your ability to know what is going to deliver value over what's not. And it's a lot easier to have those discussions in, you know, digested and thinking about that product than it is to just guess at what the next best thing we should build is. So those three.
Let me just ask you a quick question there.
Sure.
What's the most efficient way for these companies? I mean, they may have to adjust their product to Larry's earlier point about value set changes, but what's the most efficient way and gives them the information they need to make those decisions? Is it a online poll? Is it face-to-face focus groups? Is it what's the best way to go out and get that feedback?
That's a great question. I'll preface by saying I'm biased to this specific type. For these types of questions, I don't think there's anything that works better than one-on-one interviews. And what I mean by an interview, it may sound a little bit, you know, formal. It's a conversation with your customer, right? Or it's a conversation with your prospect. It could be 10 or 15 minutes. And it's concentrated around understanding that the theory you have, your assumptions about what you're going to build delivers value to them, needs to be tested empirically. And we're fighting against, you know, over 50 different types of biases that some we're aware of and some we're not on a day-to-day basis. And that's guiding our decisions on what to build when, and that can be a catastrophic problem. So I think going in with an open mindset, asking open-ended questions that are not designed to validate your assumptions, but actively looking for reasons to disprove your assumptions. It's a lot easier to find someone that's willing to talk to you positively about your product or your service. So the intent here is to find all the reasons it won't work, all the reasons that feature or that product is not actually going to deliver value, because it's a heck of a lot harder to survive once you've built that product only to find out that no one wants to buy it. It's the number one reason why 90% of startups fail, is that they build a solution for a problem that's either currently already served or doesn't exist at all. And that
other panel members, feel free to jump in here as well, but you're talking about what, you know, I spent years dealing with, or what we used to call the focus group of one, which often clients, founders, entrepreneurs will go and talk to either a friend or my neighbor or my colleague says this, and that becomes the truth.
That's their,
And I know working often with them being tasked, and Larry, like you, either marketing the product, or Lisa, I spent years in sales selling the product, based on a focus group of one. So how did we deal with that? And Larry, jump in. Lisa, Glenn, please feel free at this stage to jump in as panel members. We'd love to hear your thoughts on
Sure.
this.
Yeah. Just very quickly, I'm looking at Matt's question from an HR and hiring perspective specifically, because in Canada we have a problem with product people. It's very hard to find good product and salespeople in Canada for startups. And the problem becomes even more acute the more senior the role that you're looking for. I have a fintech client in downtown Toronto who's been looking for a VP of product for the last year and a half. And they have deep pockets, and they haven't been able to find anybody to move up here. So again, there's a talent issue too, just perspective to Matt's problem, just around from a people perspective. So I think one of the things around product is there are a lot of startups who believe that if they hire from a big startup, that's great. If I can afford to do so, they're bringing skills and experience and expertise, and they can tell us what to do. But that doesn't translate very well most of the time. Most of the time, these people who have worked for a big startup, they will have a problem adjusting if you're a small startup, even if it's a similar product type role. The pace is different. They've often learned methodologies and bad habits that are difficult to unlearn. And into your way of doing things and get them to forget the way that they were doing things. So, thinking that, hiring someone from a bigger, well-known Series A startup will actually benefit me in my seed stage, oftentimes it doesn't happen. It's a good way to start, but oftentimes it's better, cheaper, faster to hire somebody who has potential and work on that, as opposed to bringing in a seasoned person with expertise. Sometimes they bring baggage, which can actually derail your the way you want to go. Just my 2 cents.
I'll just add one point to that. Yeah, I was just thinking as Glenn was speaking, and talking about the importance of, assessing or reevaluating things. I just thought of that quote, change yourself and you'll change the world. And in many ways for a startup, it's sort of a time to if you're leaner right now, because for a lot of startups, business is just down, right? If there's a physical delivery, there's often, just you're in major pause mode right now. So I think that that it is a time of innovation, right? Startups can be the innovators. They can, and to Matt's point, if you're talking to customers or to prospects and understanding what the problems are, innovation is all about solving those problems. And so I think that this is a great time to be working on your business if you're not working in your business, right? Which is when you look at your value proposition, when you look at what your customer needs, when you look at the problems you can solve, and how can we do things differently? And I think that taking advantage of this window, to actually ask those questions and talk to customers. And surprisingly, it's easier to talk to people, I find now, than it was before, because everybody's at their desk, right? And so it's easier to have some of those conversations. Anyway, I just echo those comments.
Lisa,
Could I just, I just quickly want to add, I think aligned to that would be, I would say, strategy. So this is the time and opportunity to really start to mature your strategy. And this would be aligned with Glenn's comments around some of the skill gaps I see in founders becoming leaders, is they don't have the strategic skills. And the strategy place that this plays out is customer strategy. So obviously, we talked a spectrum of big picture and tactics, but really investing, this is the time, if you have time, to invest in strategy and process and those foundational pieces that will help you scale.
Okay, now Matt, I'm going to go back to you for a second and get Larry, Lisa, and Glenn if you want to jump in. Having worked in a position where I've seen all the layers of business and marketing and sales and promotion and HR working together, How do you, when you're doing that product development, how do you involve the other members of the company's team, even when it's lean and small? Often it seems like things are being developed in silos. So I've often heard, you know, product development comes out and they say, here's this great new product, and marketing says, well, actually that's, you know, there isn't a gap, and the sales team says my customers are giving me these 10 objections. How do we avoid that pitfall as businesses?
That's a great question. I think the best thing that I found in building my own and being part of multiple teams is that understanding, getting the team bought into the idea that customer research isn't just a couple individuals or the product person's job, that we're doing this research intentionally or unintentionally every day that we're interacting with our customers, right? So whether or not it's you're talking to someone in chat that's come to your website, or you're doing a qualification call, or you're doing a demo or an onboarding process, those are opportunities to learn about whether or not the assumptions you're making about your customer, the value you're bringing to your customer on a day-to-day basis, are actually true or not, right? Is this just your idea? And I think what's really important about that distinction is we're making decisions, those nuanced decisions day to day, with that built-in feedback loop happening, right? And when it has no inclusion from multiple departments, or more importantly, the actual market, it's way easier to make decisions that are actually not reflective of any market need, and more so about your own synthesis of whether or not that problem should be solved a particular way. So to your question, I think the best way that I found how to include everyone is to actually start by recording your assumptions about your customer, about your products, about what it's doing to deliver that value, and then getting everyone to weigh in on it, right? How confident are we about, that this is the best price we can get? How confident are we that this product is delivering value to this individual or this user? And how confident are we that our ROI, for example, is very clear to our customer? Those sorts of things are easy to assume. It just takes the work of talking to customers and being intentional about getting that information, and then just as importantly, getting it out to the rest of the team, right? So the technology has never been easier. Like there are tools out there now that you can actually record these conversations. You can spit those conversations out to a Slack channel and get that feedback flywheel really humming, so that you're keeping everybody. And I think this pandemic, has created a very unique opportunity to talk to the customers that still want to buy your products and services, because of all the things that they have to cut back on. They haven't cut back on you. So those are really important. The customers that are sticking around present you a very great opportunity to learn more about what that value they're delivering, that your product or service is delivering, and most importantly, from their perspective, not from yours. And I think to echo on what Larry said, this is part of how you actually execute empathy in understanding your customer and then making decisions based on that feedback.
I think we had an interesting example. I was with the Accelerator group yesterday, and Peter from Job Site 360 was, talking about how he had been so focused on his product and developing this great UI, and he finally got to talk to some of the resistors, who weren't actually signing on to the product. And what he realized is that the onboarding process was not good, right? The people who were his target audience aren't very tech savvy, and therefore, if they were going to buy this software or this and use it, they needed help onboarding. And so it really helped him to understand what he needs to do in terms of moving people down the funnel, and also increasing his number of conversions. So anyway, just one example that's relevant to Startup Zone.
Okay, Larry, I'm going to actually move next to you with a question.
Okay.
So you mentioned in your quick fire that consumers' mindsets are going to be impacted by the pandemic. So what do our founders, entrepreneurs, marketers need to be thinking about that as they prepare to emerge? So you know, it's not just, to your point earlier, I don't think it's just today that we need to say we're going to wash our hands. But what's the bigger message that over the next 30, 60, 90, 120, and even 12 months that they need to be considering as they're heading out? How do they handle that?
Yeah, I think your point on what does emerge mean and over what time frame is really good. You know, if you see the information coming out of the Federal Reserve in the U.S. about what's the projection for the next 2 years, right? It's going to be really bumpy, and even the news that Canada is now in recession. Like there's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen. The good news is if you read the Globe and Mail today, Barry McKenna wrote a piece about how startups are going to be the fuel of the economy post pandemic, and talking about them being the foundation. So I just, not relevant to your question, but I just thought, relevant to this group that's going to be critical to propelling the kind of productivity gains that the economy is going to need. So it's also just important for us all to be thinking about that, right? As we've been disrupted, how do we disrupt, and be part of that disruption as we go into the future? So for marketers, I think what it means is, I'll build off some of those 3 points that I made earlier, that, this consumer mindset, the number of people that are out of work, the number of companies that have been disrupted, the changes in everything is going to, people are worried. The calls to mental health lines, have skyrocketed, right? Like there's a lot of people who are in distress, and they're going to be potentially bankrupt or are broke, or they're going to need support. So the tone of communication and the kind of outpouring of support that we've seen companies doing in the last couple of months, that will continue, right? And so being empathetic, showing you care, making sure you respond to questions appropriately, stick to your values, but be empathetic and really show that you care, I think is really important. And so I think that relates to tone. And I think we all have examples, right? I can think of just even myself, like my vet versus my bank, right? My vet, really pissed me off. They were so rude and did not treat me well, and I needed to get food this week and I went somewhere else, right? And because I had that experience. Whereas my bank, I love my bank, right? Like my bank has helped me so much by, just helping me get more digital, like all kinds of stuff, right?
Wow, Larry, there's not a lot of people who say that.
I know. Everybody, Scotiabank is awesome, right? Like, so, I think that when people help you and they empathize and they're there to do good things for you, like people really remember that. And I think that, I mentioned earlier that, people will want help realizing their dreams, and, those have changed, right? And now it's not a trip to Spain, right? It's actually just going to a park, right? Like there's things that are very different now. So whereas the dream before might have been a car, or a new house, or, something like that. Now the dream might be spending more time with your family, connecting with your friends, doing those sorts of things. And so, how can you create the experiences, and the ways for people to, to be able to have those kinds of experiences. So, like restaurants, we now see them becoming more innovative, not only in terms of delivery options for people, but like, think about after this, when, that social distancing in restaurants is going to mean that experience is not going to be great. Like what could you do for delivery of experiences to someone's backyard this summer on a patio, where they can have the appropriate number of people? Like, what kinds of things could you deliver for people so that they could, could have that? And the financial stresses mean that, even as you think about the tiers, for your product offerings, what kind of layers do you have so that you're able to address the different needs of people and different financial situations. So, and I think there's a lot of companies in Startup Zone that can really be thinking, in terms of those dreams and how to solve them. Tracy with Reset Breathe, and Clark with Sleep Tight Media, Jonah with financial services. Like there's lots of ways to think about what, how could you be responding to that mindset. And then, and then lastly on digital transformation, I mean, if Parliament is happening on Zoom right now, like things are changing, and, the courts, judges are now getting together to talk about how to deliver court, very, very slow moving traditional industries. And so corporations, government, consumers, all are moving. I think we all have a story about our parents, right? My mom's playing bridge with her bridge group online, right? And Zooming with our family every week. And so, if you think about how shopping, like retail, business to business, everything is now, being delivered virtually. I think that that finding ways to accelerate that is great. I think about like Wagon, out of Startup Zone, connecting farmers with consumers, right? Like just finding ways to to bridge those gaps and responding to those kinds of needs quickly, because while consumers dream and think about the things that really are important to them, I think they've become now so used to using digital tools for the stuff that's kind of the basics, like how can we help to make that more simple for people. So I think also digital media, like use of social channels now, those who never tried TikTok probably have by now, and all of these other services, right? So it's going to be more complex from a digital media perspective as well. And so how do people, it's an opportunity for marketers again. How do you stand out and thrive, in the digital environment? Anyway, I feel like I'm rambling now, and I've probably gone over my time, so I better stop.
Oh no, I would cut you off. But I want to ask a question, because I think we're all coaching and working with entrepreneurs and startups and businesses that at the best of times are trying to be efficient and find the right way and grow in a sustainable way. I've had a bit of a time during this period as I'm coaching people to say it's not always about pivot. Sometimes it's about adapt and evolve versus entirely pivoting. And I always say, think of yourself as, whether you're on a big ship or in a canoe, small degrees of change can create significant impact. But turning the canoe or the ship all the way around takes a heck of an effort, resources, money, whether that's people, product, marketing. So before you turn yourself all the way around, and anybody who paddles knows you end up in the water more often than not when you try to do that. Think about those gentle degrees of how can I adapt? How can I evolve? So how do we take, Matt, what you've produced in a product, what we're sending Lisa's team out to sell and leaders to get behind, and Glenn keeping our staff motivated, how can we adapt and evolve slightly? So, Matt, it's still the same product, but Larry, how do I message it? How can these guys assess their messaging without actually changing the product? What can they keep in their mind, as they look at their messaging?
Yeah, I think, if you look at innovation is sometimes just slight adaptations of things, right? And I think that in this time, it's all about consumer value, right? It's about understanding what they value, and then your language and the way you, whatever your benefit is, even if how you adapt your product based on changing needs, I think it is how you convey the benefit in a way that's relevant to them right now. And I'm not sure there's a magic formula for that, other than talking, understanding, and delivering. I think that I think, just trying to think of an example that would.
Well, I can tell you when I'm working with a client now whose ads say, when you want something beyond normal. That was their ad pre-pandemic. That's probably not the right messaging now, for instance.
Right.
So just, and Lisa, jump in here. How do we get our teams and our sales teams and our messaging without going to Matt and saying, hey, all this product's no good anymore?
And that for me boils down to the value, boil down to value proposition, in a B2B sale. And that's going to be based on the construct of the conversation you're having with that specific client and the solutioning, the needs assessment you do with that client. So the value proposition, it will be customized to that client in a B2B sales environment. So that's where the distinctiveness and the alignment and the messaging will always be adapted and continues to be adaptive in good sales process in a B2B environment.
Okay. And Matt, are you getting any of that? Or not you personally, but I work with a client in the cruise industry. It's a heck of a place to be right now. All of these entrepreneurs can't necessarily recreate a new product. What can they do to sort of reassess maybe?
Well, I think that positioning is a really good example of how with nothing changing literally from a product perspective, you can change the product by changing the positioning. And I think what Lisa said, what Larry said was who specifically you're targeting and their unmet need. And I think unmet need is critical, right? It's not about just the problem. So that's where finding that gap between importance and satisfaction is essentially that continuous way you're trying to refine what it is you're delivering and what benefits it delivers to your customer. And there's no better way than actually hearing it from them. And then using that conversation to reaffirm or reposition what it is that you're delivering, right? The product is just often the how. It's not a lot about why they buy that product or what benefit it's actually delivering. So I think from a product perspective, being intentional about talking to your customers, understand it doesn't. There's lots of examples out there on the repositioning, let's say, something like a database product to a business intelligence product based on how it does something specifically is a good example of how the product did not change in any way, shape, or form, but how you positioned it completely changed who it attracted, who it was delivering value to, and why it was delivering value. So product is a big part of that, right? And that feedback loop, I think, again, couldn't be more critical. I think the misstep that most startups do too often, they think of customer research or talking to customers as like this nice to have, whereas I've learned and have many a startup battle scar to prove it's actually the first thing you should be doing, right? It's not. There's often people are doing this customer research by building a product and bringing it to market and then selling it. That's the research, right? If people are not buying your product, that's one way of collecting that feedback, and it doesn't need to be that painful. So
okay, so we don't have to reinvent the product. We can look to how do we reposition it.
I would just add, I think actually, maybe that's where you were going, like on your point about turning the ship, right? Like in many ways, the disruption has actually happened at the customer level, right? So, you think about government, right? And like the fact that everyone is moving onto Zoom, or that even their training, where think of how much the federal government would have spent on sending people to training, at different places across the country. I have a friend who works for Health Canada. They've moved all their training online. So, and he predicts that's not going to change, right? So if you think about, if you're developing training solutions, right? Like like your product might not change dramatically, but your market opportunity has just changed significantly. So if you're able to help the government, or Health Canada figure out how to do their training virtually, that is huge, right? I mean, on the other side, this disruption means disruptions for startups, right? So I think on both sides, it may be making sure your product meets that need or helps that customer who's been disrupted significantly, right? So I think there's the disruption is not always at the startup level. It's sometimes at the customer level.
At the customer level. Lisa, I'm going to go to you now. Now, let me ask you. Larry talked a little bit about how the pandemic is impacting the consumer mindset. Whether we have a sales team or the founders are the sales team, how is the pandemic impacting salespeople's mindset, and how do we move them into the recovery and then growth stage? And you tell me. In my mind, this is a 6, 12, 18 month plan.
Yeah, I think what I'd like to do is for the participants, just to make sure we've got a little bit of engagement, I'm going to ask a question and either throw it in the chat or use the reaction. So if you have thought or said, I am not good at sales, or I don't like sales, click the reaction or throw it in chat, and panel, you can participate as well. Okay, I've got a few. There we go. The honesty's coming out. Thank you. This is, so mindset, maybe just starting it. So I'm really focused on sales persona. So, and Matt and Larry focus on the customer persona. I'm really focused on the salesperson persona and what it is that makes a salesperson great. And the defining moment for me that saw me leave my corporate career and start this business was about mindset. And I define mindset as your attitude about the way you see intelligence and learning. And it was a model and research done by Carol Dweck that really got me honed on that. And what it was, as a sales coach, there was something that was just, I kept missing in helping people get to that next level of performance. And I couldn't put my finger on it. And it was reading Carol Dweck's book that I went, oh my God, this is it. I was working in a very technical industry and had been running up against fixed mindsets. And really what it is about a growth mindset. And over again, I can't tell you how many people I hear say, I'm not good at sales and I don't like sales. And so what I would offer either pre-COVID or post-COVID is that you've got to love doing sales, at least like it. You've got to flip your perspective and say, this is the way that I am going to recover from this pandemic. You've got to get really attached to sales. And so it is about how you see your sales. And one of the big things that I think is really important is that people get hung up on the word sales. And so there is a way, and to me, there's a graduated way between being an early stage company, an ideation versus a growth stage company of how you do sales. And so where does sales process come in? And I'm of the opinion, and this could be an interesting conversation for this panel, is that the formal sales processes don't necessarily need to be inserted in early life stages. If you get really good, and I think it ties well to what Matt has been saying around really get connected with your client. If you focus on having really great conversations with your clients, understanding their needs, that is the way you draw out the connections, the needs, and you will get better at closing. And that also addresses what my earlier point around trust building. So mindset about effort, challenges, obstacles, criticism, success of others is really, really important. And the big thing is that with sales, the mastery of sales is realized through practice. You're not going to get it in one of my workshops. You're not going to get it through an online course. You've got to go and do. So you've got to have that attitude of, I'm just going to go try. And I know it may not be perfect, but then it's coming away and saying, well, what did I learn? And then what do I do with that learning? So interesting, like there's this theme, this linkage of, the product and marketing, sort of stylistically and mindset, and that as well, there's an interconnection. So there's a lot of similar aspects of a sales mindset and the marketing mindset.
Okay.
I should say the customer mindset.
Yeah. So, Lisa, I spent a lot of time in sales, and And I understand what you're saying. You know, people are terrified of sales. It's probably, other than collections calls, which people don't want to make either. They're like, my clients haven't paid me. I'm like, tell them to, call them. But I think you're right. It's sales that's the next most frightening. And often when I've asked, you know, what they're afraid of, they see it, there's a feeling of rejection if they don't get the sale. I've always said to them, I prefer a no to a maybe any day, because now I figure out why it didn't fulfill your need, why you said no, and I can either convert you or I just move on. So
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that rejection and how they get past that feeling?
Yeah. Maybe we'll backtrack a little bit. To be ingrained in doing a lot of sales, you've really got to be optimistic and confident, because there are a lot of, it's long and hard. So that knowing that's the persona, the sales persona, you've got to really own, that is important. The second most important point would be, you've got to see the no's as learning. So what did you learn? And then what do you do with it? And that ties to mindset. And, you know, I think that the simplest concept that really helps to put it in perspective is that this is a funnel. It starts like this, and you're going to close like this. And, you know, the space between this and this is a lot of no's, and just really recognizing that is a lot of effort to get to that closed sale. And it's, you know, just the nature of the way sales goes. And so it is a 25 to 30% closing rate. It is knowing what the normal stats are, and setting your expectations, you know, your own self expectations around that, knowing that that is what, you know, most industry salespeople will realize, you know, giving yourself some forgiveness and knowing that you can't beat those stats, and that it is part of really good
But it's
sales.
a numbers game. I always used to say 7 out of 10 say no. So if I've had 14 no's, there must be 6 yeses coming my way, you know. Now let me ask you this. How do you, when you're coaching, how do you help, you know, particularly maybe not that salesperson, but a founder or somebody in a startup who's playing that role, because we often wear many hats. How do they ask for the close? Because I've seen many people go in and, as I say, they talk their way into the sale, and I watch them talk their way back out. How do they know when it's time to ask for the close, Lisa?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, so I'm a big one on questions. Right. So it is that, and it's a coach style, right? So, you know, the interesting aspect of is, how does a sales professional become an executive coach? It is being really good at asking questions is the common bond. And so I would say it's those validating questions, you know, I heard you say this, you know, tell me what that means. You know, can I interpret this to mean that this is, you know, or even asking the simple question, you know, we've talked about a couple things here, you know, where do you see us going from here? What's the next steps?
Well, I'm going to ask you to jump in. What are the characteristics of a salesperson? Lisa, you work with Glenn on this from the HR side. Glenn, you're on mute.
Yeah, that's a great question. I always have challenges with clients who want to hire salespeople. So I usually recommend that salespeople hire salespeople. I don't know whether Lisa would agree with that or not, but I find the salespeople are but there's such nuances in sales. So it's important that, and every company sells something differently, whether it's inside or outside or whatever. One thing I'll mention very quickly though, when you're looking for salespeople, just kind of looking at a recruitment aspect, I had a client once who had difficulty hiring a senior level salesperson. They were looking for months and no one seemed to fit the bill. So I asked him to show me his job description for this particular sales role. And it danced around a lot of what he was expecting. And I asked, where are these people not meeting your expectations? And he said, you know, they're all too junior, they're all too senior. I need to find someone in that sweet spot. So I looked at the job description, but he never really mentioned what the expectations were for sales. Like, you were expected to bring in X number of dollars, or, you know, bring in this many client leads per quarter, per year, whatever. I said, why don't you just state what those expectations are? Then maybe the volume will go down and the quality will go up. Instead of saying, yeah, because most people look at a job description like a horoscope, right? They just say, it applies to me, that's me. Oh my God, it's written for me. But the more clear you are in the expectations around, you need to bring in, these are the metrics that we use to measure performance. These are the expectations and the outcomes for results that we expect to see. If you clearly articulate those, then some people will go, you know what, I'm not quite there yet, I won't apply. Or I already did that 5 years ago, I'm probably too senior, I'd get bored, I'm not going to apply. That's exactly what happened. The volume went down, and he was much closer on target by actually stating what those expectations are. So just to flip this back to you guys too, how important do you think it is to state those expectations and be very clear about what is expected in terms of performance?
I probably look at this maybe a little differently. One of the things that involved in when I started this business for myself was I got into much more of the psychological testing. So what is the DNA? Glenn, which you would resonate. So I was just, and I was making noise, I got muted. I wrote down sort of a couple of things that stand out that I see over and over again. And so most of my clients are all high performance, and that stands out. So I would say it's confidence, right? High confidence. There's a competitiveness, whether it be intellectual competitiveness or physical competitiveness that has to be there. They have to have some leadership, and that's some leadership to step in unfamiliar territories. And then the other one that really forms the anchor of where I do a lot of work is that interpersonal savviness. And so you can't train the first three, and the interpersonal savviness is often it's there, and it just is a question of developing it. So my bias has always been hire for behavioral and teach the technical.
So I'm gonna let the guests throw out some questions. I already have one, and Matt, this one's for you. When you were talking about talking to potential customers, and if you have any questions, just throw them into the chat, either privately to me or publicly, and we'll get them to the panel. So the question was, who do they actually ask? So lots of startups don't have any clients yet, or the clients they have aren't the ones they should have. So who do they ask to get this research?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, especially for the ones that are starting out, it's a good first test of skills that they're going to have to learn from what Lisa said, sales, right? These are their first few sales. So going through the activity of defining who it is you think is a 10 out of 10, the person for sure, is going to get that, totally resonate with your solution and get a ton of value out of it. That's been the first step that I think is most impactful, because you're taking what you're thinking and you're committing it to some sort of a objective definition. And that starts, very similar to developing a persona from a marketing perspective. Those are the people you're going after. So where they are, whether or not it's being able to describe to friends and family the type of person you're looking for, what position they're in, what level of seniority, all of those things first comes from you understanding what that is and describing what it is. And again, it's not that you're perfectly right. It's more about figuring out how wrong you are, right? It's not meant to be like this definition of a perfect person. Through the process of going out and failing at, I thought it was this, or I thought it would be these 3 industries that they were really in. Turns out that this one wasn't at all. Or the whole purpose of talking to people is to get that feedback loop rolling. So finding those first few is very much about like stumbling in the dark around what your assumptions are and trying to actually go get them. So the more you define about who they are and what their problem is, and it could be their age, it could be their gender, it could be where they're spending time, how they actually answer problems, where they research. Those are all the things where, like an example, the new product that I'm working on was in that research phase. Was for researchers. It was for user experience researchers. So the first place that I started was going to communities where they already existed, and just simply introducing myself and asking them about their feedback and trying to understand their problem a little bit more, having my own assumptions leading into it, but reaching out to that community and simply just asking for their time. So I'll admit that making a product for researchers and doing research. I have a little bit of an advantage over others, but it is about that you're starting down that road of the brute force of learning how to introduce yourself and start talking about what problem you're trying to solve, right? So that I think it's there's no magic bullet to this stuff. It's really about putting yourself out there and knowing that you're wrong, and your objective is to figure out how wrong you are so that you can improve your theories and find the right people.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions out there from the panel? I had one, and I'm going to take a crack at it, and then Lisa, I'd like your input. How do I sell without sounding like a salesperson? So my answer to that is always, first of all, don't apologize for asking for a sale or trying to gain business. And my second piece of advice to the non-sales people selling is that be honest and transparent about the fact that you're looking for business. Don't hide it as something else. Don't pretend to be something else. You're in there looking for business, and you're looking for them to become a customer, to become a client. And then finally, to approach it in my years of sales, I think I never felt like a salesperson because I always felt like I was helping people. I was looking to find if there was a need or a benefit to them from the product I had. If not, I moved on. So I never felt like I was selling or jamming people. I always felt like I was just helping them fulfill a need that they already had, and I was just finding a solution for them. So that's, mentally how I prepared myself. Lisa, do you have any advice for those? I'm not a salesperson. How do I not sound like a salesperson?
Yeah, I'm going to go old school. Zig Ziglar, stop selling and start helping would be the first that picks up on your comments. The other thing is I always, back to the sales persona, your personality has to be in there. So back to, trust and likability, sales 101. And if you're not coming across as you're not, it's not the style, your connection is not representational of you, then it's not going to endear you to good sales. So that would be, really, sales is about practice, right? So 70% of sales is realized by practicing. And so you are going to have to experiment a little bit, and there are going to be lost opportunities, but finding what feels right for you and resonates with the client is important. And come back to interpersonal savviness. There are times that you may not show up exactly as yourself, right? So I'm a driver by nature. So if you go back to social styles, red, yellow, green, blue, I'm a driver by style. And if I showed up as a driver to all my meetings, I would alienate, I'd run over the clients that I've dealt with. And anyone who has bought from me knows that I can totally ease back, and I can be an analytic, I can be an expressive, I can be amiable, not fully, but I can move into that territory. So those types of things are both, knowing who you are, leveraging who you are, and knowing when you need to do those little adjustments to really resonate with your client that doesn't come across inauthentically.
That's great, Lisa. I always say I spent years bartending to put myself through university, and I became the greatest psychologist and salesperson. Larry, I'm going to go to you. You had your hand up because you were a director of client service for a long time, and that's really sales.
Yeah, well, and it's, in fact, what I was thinking as this discussion's been going on is I have a pandemic-specific example, and it goes back to the point on empathy, right? And understanding that not only consumers, businesses are also being disrupted. And I had one example from a client that whose business has been completely disrupted, like shut down. And two of the suppliers of this client have responded in very different ways. One came back with a phone call. How are you doing? Crazy times. Is there anything that we can do to help you? If there's anything, just let us know. And another equally, engaged supplier was sending templated messages that would go to any client and trying to sell additional services and all of those things. And so they were just tone deaf, right? Like they had no sense of the client, their needs and such. And these are both contexts where there's a very a deep relationship, and so that client was outraged at how they were being how one organization was communicating with them, and so delighted by how the other was. So again, to your point, it's about being human.
Great. I'm going to give Glenn a chance for a quick point on here, and then I've got a question from the audience.
Sure. Just along the theme of what we've been talking about, I think particularly for early sales as well, it's really important to not devalue your product or your service or yourself. I think particularly in early sales, you're so eager in some cases to make the sale that you're willing to give a discount of 10%, or I'll give you a free add-on or something or other. And you end up just giving away everything. And then people don't know what you stand for. People know that if you're backed into a corner, you give them half off or whatever. And it's not a good place to start, I think. I think you have to be aware of your product's value, that it's actually worth the amount of money that you're charging, that you have to be proud of your product and stand by it and say that, you know what, it is the best one in the market, or understand just where you are and say, you know what, I am starting out. Can you give me a hand up? It's okay to ask for help. But in the case of the product or the service, it's a very slippery slope once you start applying discounts and freebies and just saying, I'll do anything to make this sale, I will sell myself. That's not a great place to start. So I think maintain that sense of integrity and confidence in your product and your service. And you might get some no's as a result, but I think it's much better than that.
Great. All right, I have a question from Sparrow. Are there any risks in relying on market research conducted right now? Do we think it could be skewed to such a point that it isn't accurate even a few months from now? And Matt, I think you, Larry, just as we're going out for research and talking to our consumers or potential clients, whether they're B2B or direct, are there any risks doing that now?
I can start us off. I think yes. I think with outside the pandemic, though, there's always risk of taking any research and just making decisions purely on how, what that research says. You have to filter it through the context in which your customer is living. You have to view it through the value that the benefits that your product is delivering, and that's the job of the entrepreneur, right? Like, you have to synthesize that information and start making critical decisions about how I would say form new theories or test the ones that you've updated. So anytime that I've used market research, it's really just one data point. It doesn't make or break any one decision. You still have to get it down to the level of the individual you're trying to serve and purchase your product, and add your own layers to it. And this is what I mean by that never-ending feedback loop of I'm assuming this, I'm going to go out to the market and I'm going to be asking open-ended questions, whether or changing pricing or doing different things. We're going to experiment with it, but I'm actually putting out my prediction of what I think is going to happen based on this information.
Right.
And then I'll go out to the market and test it. So there is a risk, but I think it's always been there, right? So this is more about like doing too much or reading too much into whatever is looked at a very global level, or even that micro level. Is use it as one data point, not as the data point.
As a tool in the toolbox. It's
That's
not
right.
the final answer. Okay, Larry, I'll give you a minute, and then we're gonna let people go.
Yeah, I think Matt did a great job on that question, and I just think it's really context is important. If you're asking questions specific to things that are happening during pandemic, like there'll be a change at some point, but a lot of people are planning now for post, and thinking ahead, and even as you think about challenge, if you're B2B challenges within a business, like those aren't necessarily pandemic, they're ongoing. So I think there are a number of things to think about in terms of the context surrounding the kind of research that you do, but doing research is never a bad thing.
Awesome. All right. I think that's it. If anybody has a last minute question, we've got about 2 minutes left. If not, I'd like to thank the panel. Thank you guys for coming out. I'd like to thank everybody who showed up to yet another Zoom and another webinar and another meeting. I hope you got something of value. And if I can give the entrepreneurs and people a piece of advice, I think Glenn started with it. This could have been a flood in your location. It could have been that your founder had an accident. It could have been any number of business disruptions. And so the more we recognize that we need a continuity plan, that we need a crisis plan. You know, I have a hashtag prepared, not scared motto. So be ready, and you can overcome it. This happens, and it's about planning. So plan out 6, 12, 18. I would take it 24 months and put it on paper. It is what it is, and then deal with it and move forward. That's where I'm at. Any last gems of wisdom from our panel? No, I think
Great discussion. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming out.
Thank you.
All right. See
Take
you.
care.
Bye.